Good evening. My name is Joseph Sippets, and I'm here for SJCPL, and it's time for another Saturday night story. Now, my Yoda candle is burned way down. It's unrecognizable, which is a shame because these days we seem to be in need of enlightenment. So I've turned to enlightenment from Hunter S. Thompson in The Great Shark Hunt, from 1970, a story that reveals the dark heart of the American psyche. And it's called The Kentucky Derby is Decadent and Depraved. I've edited it slightly, so actually somewhat. So let's begin. I just got off the plane around midnight and no one spoke as I crossed the dark runway to the terminal. The air was thick and hot, like wandering into a steam bath. Inside, people hugged each other and shook hands, big grins and a whoop here and there. By God, you old bastard, good to see you, boy. Damn good, and I mean it. In the air-conditioned lounge, I met a man from Houston who said his name was something or other. Just call me Jimbo. And he was here to get it on. I'm ready for anything, by God, anything at all. Yeah, what you drinking? I ordered a margarita on ice, but he wouldn't hear of it. No, what the hell kind of drink is that for Kentucky Derby time? What's wrong with you, boy? Okay, a double Old Fitz on ice. Jimbo nodded his approval. Say, he said, you look like you might be in the horse business, am I right? No, I said, I'm a photographer. Yeah? He eyed my leather bag with new interest. Is that what you've got in there, cameras? Who do you work for? Playboy, I lied. He laughed. Well, God, dang. What are you, gonna take pictures of naked horses? I bet you'd be working pretty hard when they run the Kentucky Oaks. That's a race just for fillies. He was laughing wildly. Hell yes, and they'll all be naked too. I shook my head and said nothing. Just stared at him for a moment, trying to look grim. There's going to be trouble, I said. My assignment is to take pictures of the riot. What riot? I hesitated, twirling the ice in my drink. At the track. On Derby Day. The Black Panthers. I stared at him again. Don't you read the newspapers? The grin on his face had collapsed. What the hell are you talking about? Well, maybe I shouldn't tell you, I shrugged. But, hell, everyone else seems to know the cops in the National Guard have been getting ready for 6 weeks. They have 20,000 troops on alert at Fort Knox. They've warned us, press and photographers, to wear helmets and special vests like flak jackets. We were told to expect shooting. No, he shouted. His hands flew up and hovered momentarily between us, as if to ward off the words he was hearing. Then he whacked his fist on the bar. Those sons of God almighty, the Kentucky Derby. He kept shaking his head. No, that's almost too bad to believe. Now he seemed to be sagging at his stool, and when he looked up, his eyes were misty. Why? Why here? Don't they respect anything? I shrugged again. It's not just the Panthers. The FBI says busloads of white crazies are coming in from all over the country to mix with the crowd and attack all at once from every direction. They'll be dressed like everyone else, coats and ties and all that. But when the trouble starts, well, that's why the cops are worried. He sat for a moment looking hurt and confused and not quite able to digest all this terrible news. Then he cried out, oh, what in the name of God is happening to our country? Where can you get away from it? Not here, I said, picking up my bag. Thanks for the drink and good luck. He grabbed my arm, urging me to have another, but I told him I was overdue at the press club and hustled off to get my act together for the awful spectacle. At the airport newsstand, I picked up a newspaper and scanned the front page headlines. Nixon sends GIs into Cambodia to hit the Reds. B-52s raid. 4,000 U.S. troops deployed near Yale as tension grows over Panther protest. At the bottom of the page was a photo of Diane Crump, soon to be the first woman jockey ever to ride in the Kentucky Derby. The photographer had snapped her, quote, stopping in the barn to fondle her mont and fathom, end quote. The rest of the paper was spotted with ugly war news and stories of student unrest. The next day was heavy, with only 30 hours until post time and no press credentials. And according to the sports editor of the Louisville Courier Journal, no hope of getting any. Worse, I needed 2 sets, one for myself and another for Ralph Steadman, an English illustrator who was coming from London to do some derby drawings. All I knew about him was that this was his first visit to the United States. And the more I pondered the fact, the more it gave me fear. How would he bear up under the heinous culture shock of being lifted out of London and plunged into a drunken mob scene at Kentucky Derby? There was no way of knowing. Hopefully, he would ride a few days ahead and give himself time to get acclimated. Maybe a few hours of peaceful sightseeing in the bluegrass country around Lexington. My plan was to pick him up at the airport in a huge Pontiac ballbuster and I rented from a used car salesman named Captain Quick and whisk him off into some peaceful setting that might remind him of England. I took the expressway out to the track, driving very fast and jumping the monster car back and forth between lanes, driving with a beer in one hand and my mind so muddled I almost crashed into a Volkswagen full of nuns. When I swerved to catch the right exit, there was a slim chance I thought that I might be able to catch the ugly Britisher before he checked in. But Steadman was already in the press box when I got there, a bearded young Englishman wearing a tweed coat and RAF sunglasses. There was nothing particularly odd about him. No facial veins, clumps of bristly warts. I told him that the motel woman's description of him, and he seemed puzzled. "Don't let it bother you," I said. "Just keep in mind that for the next few days, we're in Louisville, Kentucky, not London, not even New York. This is a weird place. You're lucky that mental defective at the hotel didn't jerk the pistol out of the cash register and blow a big hole in you." I laughed, but he looked worried. "Just pretend you were visiting a huge outdoor loony bin," I said. "If the inmates get out of control, we'll soak them down with mace." I showed him a can of Chemical Billy, resisting the urge to fire it across the room at a rat-faced man typing diligently at the Associated Press section. By later Friday afternoon, we went out on the balcony of the press box, and I tried to describe the difference between what we were seeing today and what would be happening tomorrow. "The whole thing," I said, "will be jammed with people, 50,000 or so, and most will be staggeringly drunk. It's a fantastic scene. Thousands of people fainting, crying, copulating, trampling each other, fighting with broken whiskey bottles. We'll have to spend some time out here, but it's hard to move around with too many bodies. Is it safe out there? Will we ever come back?" He had done a few sketches. He had looked so nervous I laughed. "I'm just kidding," I said. "Don't worry. At the first sign of trouble, I'll start pumping this Chemical Billy into the crowd." He had done a few good sketches, but so far we hadn't seen that special kind of face I felt we would need for the lead drawing. It was the face I'd seen 1,000 times at every derby I'd ever been to. I saw it in my head as the mask of the whiskey gentry, the pretentious mix of booze, failed dreams, and terminal identity crisis, the inevitable result of too much inbreeding in a closed and ignorant culture. So the face I was trying to find in Churchill Downs that weekend was a symbol, in my mind, of the whole doomed atavistic culture that makes the Kentucky Derby what it is. It was Saturday morning, the day of the big race, and we were having breakfast in this plastic hamburger place called the Fish Meat Village. Our rooms were just across the room in the brown suburban hotel. They had a dining room, but the food was so bad we couldn't handle it anymore. Steadman liked the fish meat place because it had fish and chips. I preferred the French toast, which was really pancake batter, fried to the proper thickness, and then chopped out with a sort of cookie cutter to resemble pieces of toast. Beyond the drink and the lack of sleep, our only real problem at this point was the question of access to the clubhouse. Finally, we decided to go ahead and steal 2 passes if necessary, rather than miss that part of the action. This was the last coherent decision we were able to make for the next 48 hours. From that point on, almost from the very moment we started out to the track, we lost control of events and spent the rest of the weekend churning around a sea of drunken horrors. My notes and recollection from Derby Day are somewhat scrambled. Steadman had wanted to see some Kentucky colonels, but he wasn't sure what they looked like. I told him to go back into the clubhouse men's room and look for the men in white linen suits vomiting in the urinals. They have huge brown whiskey stains on the fronts of their suits, I said. But watch the shoes. That's a tip-off. Most of them manage to avoid vomiting on their own clothes, but they never miss their shoes. We went back to the clubhouse to watch the big race. When the crowd stood to face the flag and sing "My Old Kentucky Home," Stedman faced the crowd and sketched frantically. Somewhere up in the boxes, a voice screeched, "Turn around, you airy freak!" The race itself was only 2 minutes long, an event, and even from our super status seats and using 12-power glasses, there was no way to see what was really happening. Later, watching a TV rerun in the press box, we saw what happened to our horses. Holy Land, Ralph's choice, stumbled and lost its jockey in the final turn. Mine, Silent Screen, had the lead coming into the stretch, but then faded to 5th at the finish. The winner was a 16-to-1 shot named Dust Commander. Sometime around 10:30 Monday morning, I was awakened by a scratching sound at my door. I leaned out of the bed and pulled the curtain back just far enough to see Stedman outside. "What do you want?" "What about having some breakfast?" he said. I lunged out of bed and tried to open the door, but it caught on the night chain and banged shut again. I couldn't cope with the chain. The thing wouldn't come out of the track, so I ripped it out of the wall with a vicious jerk on the door. Ralph didn't blink. "Bad luck," he muttered. I could barely see him. My eyes were swollen almost shut, and the sudden burst of sunlight through the door left me stunned and helpless like a sick mole. Stedman was mumbling about sickness and terrible heat. I fell back on the bed and tried to focus on him as he moved around the room in a very distracted way for a few moments. Then suddenly he darted over to the beer bucket and seized a Colt 45. "Christ," I said, "you're getting out of control." He nodded and ripped the cap off, taking a long drink. "You know, this is really awful," he said finally. "I must get out of this place." He shook his head nervously. "The plane leaves at 3:30, but I don't know if I'll make it." I barely heard him. My eyes were finally opened enough for me to focus on the mirror across the room, and I was stunned at the shock of recognition. For a confused instant, I thought that Ralph had brought somebody with him, the model for that one special face we've been looking for. There he was, by God, in a puffy, drink-ravaged, disease-ridden caricature, like an awful cartoon version of the old snapshot in some once proud mother's family photo album. It was the face we'd been looking for, and of course, it was my own. Horrible. Horrible. By this time, Ralph wouldn't even order coffee. He kept asking for more water. "It's the only thing we have that's fit for human consumption," he explained. Then, with an hour or so to kill before he had to catch the plane, we spread the drawings out on the table and pondered them for a while, wondering if he'd caught the proper spirit of the thing. But we couldn't make up our minds. His hands were shaking so badly that he had trouble holding the paper, and my vision was so blurred that I could barely see what he had drawn. He said, "We both look worse than anything you've drawn here." He smiled. "You know, I've been thinking about that," he said. "We came down here to see this terrible scene, people all pissed out of their minds, vomiting and on themselves and all that. And now, you know what? It's us." Huge Pontiac ballbuster blowing through traffic on the expressway. A radio news bulletin says the National Guard was massacring students at Kent State, and Nixon is still bombing Cambodia. The journalist is driving, ignoring his passenger, who is now nearly naked after taking off most of his clothing, which he holds out the window, trying to wind wash the mace out of it. His eyes are bright red, and his face and chest are soaked with the beer he's been using to rinse out the awful chemical from his flesh. The front of his woolen trousers were soaked with vomit. His body is racked with fits of coughing and wild choking sobs. The journalist rams the big car through the traffic into the spot where in the front of the terminal. Then he reaches over to open the door on the passenger side and shoves the Englishman out, snarling, "Bugger off, you worthless, you twisted." If I weren't sick, I'd kick your all the way to the bowling green, you scum-sucking foreign geek. Maze is too good for you. We can do without your kind in Kentucky. Good night.